A childless billionaire CEO's world shatters when he sees a news report about a missing boy who looks just like him. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching us from, and please like this video to support the channel. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Bradley Shaw sat on the sleek leather couch in his penthouse, a tumbler of bourbon resting on the glass table beside him. The city skyline stretched out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, glowing with the hum of late-night life, but he wasn't paying attention. The day had been long, endless meetings, negotiations, numbers that had blurred together. He was used to it, thrived in it even, but tonight, for some reason, he felt restless. His fingers hovered over the remote, flipping mindlessly through channels, trying to shut his brain off. And then he heard it. A breaking news report cut through the static of the evening, the anchor's voice crisp and urgent. Authorities are searching for a missing 1-year-old boy, abducted from his mother's home late last night in Charleston. The mother, Ashley Swan, reported the child missing in the early hours of the morning. Police believe the suspect is the child's estranged father. Bradley's thumb froze over the remote. His gaze snapped to the screen. The footage shifted from the newsroom to a photograph of the missing child, a wide-eyed little boy with messy dark curls, big blue eyes, and a small dimple at the corner of his mouth. Bradley's heart clenched painfully. That face. Something about it gnawed at the edges of his mind, a familiarity he couldn't shake. He sat forward, his breath slowing, his pulse drumming hard in his ears. He didn't believe in coincidences, but this was impossible. The anchor continued, her voice professional but laced with sympathy. The boy's mother, Ashley Swan, is pleading for the safe return of her son, stating that his disappearance is the result of a custody dispute gone wrong. Authorities are currently searching for the suspect, Daniel Swan, who was last seen driving a dark blue sedan out of Charleston. The screen changed again, now showing a brief clip of a woman speaking to reporters. Ashley. Bradley's stomach dropped. It had been 2 years since he'd seen her, but there she was, her dark auburn hair pulled into a loose ponytail, tear-streaked cheeks, and panic burning behind her green eyes. She looked thinner, exhausted, a shadow of the woman he had met that night. That night. The memory hit him like a freight train, dragging him back to a time he hadn't thought about in years. A business trip, a night in a dimly lit hotel bar, the way she'd laughed at something he'd said, the way they'd clicked instantly. She had been unlike anyone he'd ever met, sharp, witty, independent. There had been something intoxicating about her, something magnetic that pulled him in despite knowing he'd be gone by morning. He had told himself it was just a moment, a fleeting indulgence in an otherwise rigid life. And when he had woken up, she had already left. No note, no number. Just gone, as if she had never been there at all. He had never tried to find her. He had told himself it was for the best. But now, sitting there in his penthouse, watching her plead for her child's return, Bradley felt something close to dread settle in his chest. The pieces clicked into place, one by one, forming a picture that made his hands clench into fists. The boy. His resemblance was undeniable. The deep blue eyes, Bradley's eyes. The dimple. His mother always said it was the first thing she noticed when he was born. A slow realization slithered through him, cold and sharp. This wasn't just any missing child. It wasn't just a tragic news story flashing across his screen. This boy, the one taken from his mother's arms, could be his son. Bradley exhaled, forcing himself to think rationally, but his mind was already racing. Ashley had never reached out. She had never called, never tried to tell him. Had she known? Had she even wanted him to know? He pushed the thought aside, knowing that now wasn't the time to dwell on the past. Right now, there was only one thing that mattered: the boy was missing, and from the sound of it, he had been taken by a man who had nothing to lose. He grabbed his phone, already dialing before he fully registered what he was doing. "Marcus," he said the moment his head of security answered. "I need you to get me everything you can on a woman named Ashley Swan. Find out where she lives, who she's associated with, and most importantly, where this ex-husband of hers could be hiding." There was a brief pause before Marcus spoke. Sir, this isn't related to business, is it? Bradley's jaw tightened. No. It's personal. Another pause, but then the quiet click of a keyboard on the other end. Understood. I'll have something for you within the hour. Bradley hung up and turned back to the television, watching as Ashley's interview ended and the screen cut to a picture of the missing child again. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. If he was right, if this boy was his, then Ashley had been raising him alone all this time. And now, she was living every parent's worst nightmare. He didn't know what had happened between her and her ex-husband, didn't know how things had unraveled so drastically that Daniel had resorted to kidnapping. But he knew one thing with certainty. If this was his son, there was no force in the world that would stop him from getting him back. Bradley barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boy's face staring back at him, those unmistakable blue eyes, the dimple that mirrored his own. The image burned into his mind, refusing to let go. He lay in bed for hours, thoughts twisting in a tangled web of questions with no answers. Had Ashley known the truth all along? Had she purposely kept him in the dark? And if she had, why? He needed answers, but more importantly, he needed to find that child. His child. By the time the sun rose, Bradley was already at his desk, phone in hand. He scrolled through old emails, travel itineraries, anything that could help him piece together the details of that long-ago business trip. He hadn't thought about it in years, but now, every moment felt crucial. The city, the hotel, the date, it all lined up. He had been there exactly 2 years ago. He had met Ashley in that very town. And if the timeline matched, there was no question. The boy was his. Bradley dialed his assistant, Kara, barely waiting for her to answer before speaking. I need flight records, hotel receipts, anything from my trip to Charleston 2 years ago. Find out if I paid with my personal account or company card, and get me a list of anyone I met with during that time. There was a beat of silence before Kara responded, her voice cautious. Sir, is everything all right? Just do it, Kara. She didn't ask any more questions. That was why he kept her around. She was efficient, sharp, and never pried where she shouldn't. Within minutes, an email landed in his inbox. The receipts confirmed everything. He had stayed at the Sinclair Hotel for 3 nights. A second charge from the rooftop bar showed the exact night he had met Ashley. The memories were clearer now. She had been sitting at the far end of the bar, dressed in a sleek black dress, her hair tumbling over her shoulders in waves. He had noticed her immediately, but it was the way she had held herself that intrigued him. She hadn't been like the other women who threw themselves at him for his wealth or status. She had been different. And now, 2 years later, she was the mother of his child. A child who had been ripped from her arms. Bradley scrolled further down Kara's email. A name jumped out at him. Daniel Swan. The name of her ex-husband. His stomach turned. If this was the man who had taken the boy, then Bradley wasn't just dealing with an unstable father. He was dealing with someone who had been stewing in betrayal and rage for months. While Bradley pieced together the past, Ashley was living her worst nightmare. She hadn't stopped moving since the moment her son was taken. The police had been of little help, treating it as a standard custody dispute rather than a real kidnapping. But she knew better. This wasn't about custody. This was about revenge. She stormed into the police station again, exhaustion pressing down on her like a crushing weight, but determination stronger than ever. I need an update, she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. You should be out there looking for him. He's only a baby. Her voice caught, throat tightening, but she forced herself to stay composed. The officer at the desk gave her a tired look. Ma'am, we're doing everything we can. But without concrete evidence that Daniel intends to harm the child, he took him in the middle of the night, she snapped. That's not a custody dispute. That's kidnapping. The officer sighed. We've issued a warrant for questioning, but Mr. Swan's lawyer is claiming he's simply asserting his parental rights. Ashley wanted to scream. Parental rights? Daniel wasn't even the boy's real father, and he knew it. That was why he had done this. He wanted to punish her for what she had done, for keeping the baby, for the way her choice had shattered his perfect life. She had tried to make things work with Daniel after finding out she was pregnant, had hoped against hope that he would love the child as his own, but the truth had eventually come out. It had taken one slip-up, one moment of suspicion, one paternity test. And then, everything had fallen apart. Daniel had been cruel, relentless in his rage. He had called her a liar, a cheat, a disgrace. He had walked out and left her alone, pregnant, vulnerable. But she had fought to rebuild her life. She had raised her son with everything she had, never looking back. Until now. Until Daniel had returned, not for her, not for their past, but to destroy her. And now he had her child. Ashley left the station with her stomach twisted in knots, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. She didn't know where to go next. She had knocked on doors, searched every possible place Daniel could be hiding, but nothing. He was too careful. Too calculated. Her phone buzzed, breaking through her spiraling thoughts. She grabbed it, glancing at the unknown number flashing across the screen. Ashley Swan? The voice was deep, controlled, but unfamiliar. Her breath hitched. Who is this? My name is Bradley Shaw. Silence. A charged, suffocating silence. Ashley's grip on the phone tightened. She didn't need to ask how he had found her. Bradley Shaw was one of the most powerful men in the country. But why was he calling? Why now? I saw the news, he said after a moment, his voice softer. I need to know the truth, Ashley. Is he mine? Ashley closed her eyes, a tremor running through her. She had never planned to tell him. She had made peace with that choice. But now, it didn't matter anymore. The truth was out. And Bradley was the only person in the world who might be able to help her get her son back. Yes, she whispered, voice breaking. He's yours. There was a pause, but then, in a voice so steady it sent shivers down her spine, Bradley said, Then I'm coming for him. Ashley's breath caught. She wasn't sure what had shifted, what had changed, but in that moment, she realized something terrifying. For the first time since her son had been taken, she felt hope. Bradley didn't waste a second. The moment Ashley whispered the truth, he's yours, something inside him shifted. The uncertainty, the questions, the disbelief, it all disappeared, replaced by a singular, unshakable resolve. His son had been taken, and he would do whatever it took to bring him home. As soon as the call ended, Bradley was already moving, pacing his penthouse with his phone pressed to his ear. Marcus, he said the second his head of security picked up. I need you to find Ashley Swan's current address. Now. Marcus didn't hesitate. Already on it, sir. Give me 5 minutes. Bradley clenched his jaw, his mind racing. He barely remembered what Ashley had told him in those few minutes on the phone. Her voice had been so broken, raw. She was holding on by a thread, and he hated knowing that for the past 2 years, she had been struggling alone. He should have been there. He should have known. His fingers curled into fists as he thought about Daniel Swan. The man had taken his son, had used him as a weapon to destroy Ashley. He had left her to fend for herself, humiliated, abandoned, and now he had come back to rip her world apart all over again. Bradley didn't know what kind of man Daniel was, but he knew one thing: this wasn't about fatherhood. This was about control, power, and vengeance. His phone buzzed. Marcus again. Got it. She's in a small house on the outskirts of Charleston. Sending the address now. Bradley didn't even respond before hanging up and dialing Ashley's number again. She picked up on the first ring, as if she had been waiting for him. Bradley, she breathed, her voice thick with exhaustion and emotion. I'm coming to you, he said, leaving no room for argument. Tonight. He heard her exhale, a small, broken sound. Bradley, I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything. He paused, then softened his voice. Just tell me everything. Ashley let out a shaky breath, and for a few moments, there was only silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with grief, regret, and a kind of quiet strength that made his chest tighten. "After you left," she began, "I found out I was pregnant. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't even sure if I should try to find you. But then Daniel found out first." Bradley stiffened, his grip tightening on the phone. "He was so happy at first," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'd been trying for years, and when I told him, he thought it was a miracle. But then, the doubts started. He knew something was off. I think deep down, he always suspected, but he didn't want to believe it. Until the baby was born." Bradley stayed silent, listening. "When Leo was born, he had your eyes, Bradley. Your face. Daniel knew immediately." Her voice cracked. "He had a paternity test done behind my back. When he got the results, he lost it. He called me a liar, a cheater, every disgusting word you can think of. But it wasn't just anger. It was hate. He felt like I had made a fool of him. He told me I ruined his life." Bradley could feel his blood pressure rising, but he kept his voice steady. "And then what?" "He left." She let out a small, bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. "He packed a bag and walked out that night. No discussion, no attempt to understand. He just left. Filed for divorce the next morning." Bradley closed his eyes, trying to push back the wave of guilt crashing over him. She had been left to handle everything: pregnancy, a newborn, a shattered marriage, all alone. Meanwhile, he had been living his perfect, structured life, unaware that his own child was out there. "I didn't fight him on it," she admitted. "I was too exhausted, too ashamed. He made sure I walked away with nothing. No money, no house. I had to start over from scratch, and I did. I built a life for me and Leo. I thought it was over." Bradley already knew what was coming next. "But Daniel came back," she whispered. "He showed up months ago, pretending to want to make peace, pretending he wanted to see Leo. I let him. I thought maybe he had healed, that he'd moved on. But I was so stupid. He was never going to forgive me. He was waiting, Bradley. Waiting to hurt me the way he thought I hurt him." Bradley inhaled sharply, his free hand clenching at his side. "When he took Leo, I knew it wasn't about wanting him. He doesn't want to raise him. He just wants me to suffer." Bradley didn't speak for a long moment. He could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the weight of years of pain and survival. She had been fighting alone for so long. Not anymore. "Ashley," he said, voice low, steady. "Listen to me. I'm getting on a plane tonight. I'll be there in a few hours." He could hear her sharp intake of breath. "Bradley, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." His voice left no room for argument. "You're not alone in this anymore. Leo is my son, and I will get him back." Silence. A long, fragile moment of silence. Then a choked whisper. "Thank you?" Bradley hung up, already moving. He grabbed his jacket, shoved his phone into his pocket, and strode toward the door. Kara was waiting for him in the hallway, eyes wide with confusion. "Sir, your meetings tomorrow, cancel them." Her brows lifted. "All of them?" "Yes." She blinked but nodded, already reaching for her phone. "Should I book your usual jet?" "Yes." "As soon as possible." Kara hesitated, watching him closely. "Sir? I've never seen you drop everything like this." "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said, walking past her without another word. As he stepped into the elevator, his pulse pounded in his ears. Everything had changed in a matter of hours. This wasn't about business. This wasn't about wealth or power. This was about his son. And he would burn the world to the ground before he let anyone take him away again. Bradley barely remembered the flight. The hours blurred into a restless haze of quiet rage and relentless determination. He had been in control his entire life, orchestrating deals, commanding boardrooms, shaping the world to his will, but none of that mattered now. The only thing that mattered was finding his son. His son. The word was still foreign, still new, but the weight of it had settled deep in his bones. The private jet touched down just past midnight. Charleston was quiet, the city lights casting a soft glow over the streets, but Bradley felt no calm. His car was already waiting on the tarmac, a black SUV with Marcus at the wheel. No words were exchanged as Bradley climbed in, jaw tight, fingers drumming impatiently against his knee. The drive was short, yet it stretched unbearably long in his mind. He wasn't prepared for what he would see when he got there, wasn't prepared for the woman he had once known to be completely unraveled by grief and fear. When the car pulled up outside Ashley's small house, Bradley barely waited for it to stop before pushing the door open. The neighborhood was quiet, modest, nothing like the world of opulence he was used to. The porch light was on, its glow flickering unevenly against the dark. He stepped up to the door, his heart pounding harder than he cared to admit, and knocked. The door opened almost instantly. And then she was there. Ashley. For a moment, she just stared at him, her green eyes wide with exhaustion and disbelief. She looked so different from the woman he remembered. The confident, laughing woman in the hotel bar had been replaced by someone frail, weary, and utterly broken. She had dark circles under her eyes, her skin was pale, and her hair was tied back in a loose, careless knot. She was gripping the doorframe, as if she wasn't sure she had the strength to keep standing. And then, as if something inside her snapped, she let out a small, gasping sob and collapsed into his arms. Bradley caught her without hesitation. She was shaking, her hands gripping his jacket like a lifeline. He could feel the sheer exhaustion in her body, the way her knees nearly buckled beneath her. He tightened his hold on her, his hand instinctively coming up to cradle the back of her head. "I'm here," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "I've got you." For a long moment, she didn't say anything. She just clung to him, her face pressed against his chest, her entire body trembling. When she finally pulled away, her breath was shaky, her hands still gripping his sleeves. "I didn't think you'd come," she admitted, her voice hoarse. Bradley met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I told you I would." She let out a breath, nodding once before stepping back and wiping at her face. "Come in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Bradley followed her inside. The house was small but clean, though it was clear she hadn't been taking care of herself. The dining table was covered in papers, some crumpled, others neatly stacked, police reports, custody documents, news clippings. A single baby shoe sat abandoned on the couch, and something about the sight of it broke something in Bradley's chest. Ashley sat down heavily at the table, running a hand over her face. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with the footage," Bradley said, his voice controlled but firm. "I need to see exactly what happened." Ashley hesitated, then reached for her laptop. She clicked through a few files, her hands shaking slightly, before turning the screen toward him. The footage was grainy, taken from a small security camera mounted above her front door. Bradley leaned in, eyes narrowing as the video played. It showed Daniel. Bradley had seen pictures of the man in his background search, but seeing him move, watching him force his way inside, was different. Daniel was tall, built like someone who had spent his life trying to prove something. He moved with purpose, with fury, and when he emerged moments later with a small, squirming bundle in his arms, Bradley felt something primal and murderous ignite inside him. Ashley's voice was barely a whisper. "I woke up to the sound of the door slamming. By the time I got outside, he was already gone." Bradley exhaled slowly, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He rewound the footage, watching the timestamp. "This was at 2:47 a.m. She nodded. "I called the police right after, but Daniel was gone. No security cameras caught him leaving the neighborhood. It's like he just disappeared." Bradley straightened, his mind already shifting into calculated precision. "He didn't disappear. He covered his tracks." Ashley let out a hollow laugh. "Of course he did. He's good at that." Bradley turned to face her fully. "Ashley, I need you to tell me everything you know about him. His habits, his connections, anything that might give me an idea of where he could have taken Leo." She swallowed hard. He's powerful, Bradley. Not like you, not in the way that builds empires. His power is different. It's quieter, dirtier. His family has money, but he likes control more than wealth. He has friends in law enforcement, judges, people who owe him favors. That's why the police aren't doing more. They know what he's capable of. Bradley's fingers curled into fists at his sides. He had dealt with men like Daniel before. Entitled, petty, cruel. The kind of men who saw people as things to own, things to break when they no longer served their purpose. He had destroyed men like that in the boardroom. Now, he would do it in real life. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus. The man answered immediately. Sir? Daniel Swan. I need everything. Bank transactions, GPS records, surveillance footage, any connections he has in law enforcement. Find him. Now. There was no hesitation. Understood. Bradley hung up and turned back to Ashley. She was staring at him, her eyes filled with something unreadable. You really think you can find him? She asked softly. Bradley met her gaze, his expression dark, unshakable. I don't think. I know. Ashley let out a slow, shaky breath, and for the first time since this nightmare began, her eyes held something other than fear. Hope. Bradley spent the next few hours operating like a man possessed. There was no sleep, no pause, only relentless motion. His mind